So, big decision number 4 for President Washington. How do we establish faith in the national government? And what we mean by faith is, what are we going to do so that people trust us? So they trust that the national government can follow through on its promises and do what it says it's going to do. Now, in terms of building trust, a lot of this stems from Hamilton's ideology and what Hamilton believes is best. Now, we see this concept of war bonds, or just bonds in general. Bonds are like an IOU, where you put money up front and you get it back later plus interest. So you, over time, theoretically, will receive more money than you originally gave. Now, bonds had been sold to help pay for the Revolution, and there were a lot of veterans who were paid with government bonds. Now, unfortunately, many of these veterans lost faith in the ability of the federal government to ever pay back these loans. Because, the currency that had been used throughout the war and before the Constitution was kind of worthless. So a lot of them sold them at a fraction of the original value to what are called speculators. Speculators meaning people who buy something in the hope that the value will increase so they can sell it at a profit. Hamilton's plan was to pay off every single bond immediately at face value. At face value. So the idea behind this is that if this was done now, before the bonds had matured, because with a bond, normally there's a set amount of time before it matures, or you get full value for it. Hamilton wants to do it now, so that people trust that the government can follow through with their promises. Now, Madison strongly objects to this because he wants to ensure that the original holders of the bonds, meaning these veterans who were really hard up, would get the profits. And many in the public agreed that speculators should not profit off the misfortune of these veterans. Now, Washington himself was a veteran, but he had warned soldiers not to sell the bonds, and he refused to engage in the debate since it was Congress who had asked for Hamilton's report. All of this was in what was called his report on public credit. He believed that the bonds should be paid back immediately in full. Madison disagrees, thus indicating another rupture in their relationship. So the bonds are paid back. Now, step 2 of building trust would be assumption of state war debt. And there's still, there's a lot in debt, to be clear. About $54 million in national debt and $25 million in state debts that are left over from the Revolution. Now, Washington and Hamilton believe that honoring this debt would establish our legitimacy as a nation. Assumption means that the national government assumes or takes on all of the debt of each state that still owes money. So the states are now free and clear. But if you have a small national debt, emphasis on small, that can be paid off little by little over time, the nation could establish what's called credit. And if you have credit, you can get loans when you need them. It's kind of like the idea of, when you go to buy a house, you'll often take out what's called a mortgage, a loan on a home or property. The bank, the credit union, whoever you want to get the loan from, will look at your credit history, meaning, are you responsible with debt? Do you have a credit card? Do you pay off your statements monthly? Do you have a car loan or car payment? Have you paid it off on time? That's essentially what we're doing as a nation, or that's what we want to do. So ultimately, if we can establish that small national debt and prove we are responsible in paying it off little by little on time, then ultimately we can get money when we need it. Makes sense from the viewpoint of Treasury Secretary Hamilton, does not make sense to Madison or Secretary of State Jefferson. So in terms of trying to resolve this, Madison leads that opposition because a lot of southern states had already paid back the loans that they had. They had paid off their war debts. Now you have northern states saying, well, we had to take on more debt because a lot of the fighting took place in the north at first. And there's really this whole back and forth. Hamilton will not back down from this. He absolutely will not. So to solve it, we have what's often been referred to as the Compromise of 1790. If you're familiar with the musical Hamilton, this is the song Room Where It Happened. That's what's going on here. So the capital is New York City at the time, contemporary capital. Jefferson invites Madison and Hamilton to his quarters, meaning his residence in New York City. Do we know what exactly was said? We do not. Hence the name of the song, Room Where It Happened. But we do know that these three men got together, they had dinner, they discussed. The end result is Madison backed off of his opposition to the Assumption Plan. So Assumption passed, meaning the federal government took on the debt of the states. We also know that the national capital was now going to be placed in the geographic South. Southerners kind of wanted a national capital so that they could, keep an eye on things, make sure everything was on the up and up. And, Pennsylvania was disappointed because they had hoped that Philadelphia would be the national capital. New York was disappointed. They wanted New York City. But we know it's going to be on land that is between Maryland and Virginia. And Washington did help survey. He was granted permission to help choose the site of the city because he was a surveyor. But he was also not personally assisted, but the man on screen, Benjamin Banneker, helped survey this land. And Banneker has a real interesting backstory. He not only is a surveyor, but he was an amateur astronomer. He was a writer. He just accomplishes all of these things. He published almanacs, very similar to Ben Franklin, but he had a huge role in surveying this national capital. And when it says unassuming for years, that means that it's going to take decades for our national capital to become what we know of today. It was not a sight to see at all. A lot of foreign leaders came and they just were completely underwhelmed by it. So in this case, when we get into the idea of establishing faith, those bonds, those IOUs, are paid off in full before the maturity date. And then in exchange for the national government assuming state debts, building a small national debt that could be paid off to establish credit, the South will get the national capital, although it is a bargain that Jefferson later said he would come to regret.